So welcome to our second CADSA presentation of the Deconstructing the Norms panel. This will be our first part of the panel, and here we'll be talking about different heteronormative norms that we see within college athletics and the college space in general. I'm happy to have three special guests with us today, and they all are involved in college athletics in some parameter. The purpose of today's event is to celebrate pride while we're generating visibility on the strict norms in collegiate athletics, like I said before. But we also are going to talk about how student athletes and those involved in athletics are helping to deconstruct these norms and make athletics a more equal and inviting and accepting place. I am Michaela Adolphus. I go by she, they pronouns. I'm the director of CADSA National, and I will be your host today. I will pass it off to our first guest, Kamal, and then we'll go down from there.
Sweet. Thanks, Michaela. Hi, everyone. My name is Kamal Craig Golab, and I will be a sixth year at Colorado State University. I am a part of the track and field program there, and I have done a lot of leadership roles at CSU. I'm a part of SAC as the Diversity and Inclusion Director. I'm a part of the John Mosey Leadership Program that's over there. I have been a part of the Together initiative that the CSU Athletic Department has put out. And I just recently started a new organization at CSU called Colorado State Athlete Ally, and that's in the works. So I've done a lot of stuff, and I'm super excited to be here.
Thanks, Kamal. So I'll pass it off to Alex.
Yeesh, Kamal, I am so thankful to hear that resume. So you could have kept going on that one. Hard to follow up. But my name is Alex Sommer. My pronouns are she, her. I currently serve as an athletic academic counselor and student-athlete engagement coordinator at Ohio State University. I also have the privilege of supporting the track and field team, the Spirit programs, and then also women's ice hockey in an academic capacity. And then I serve as the primary advisor for two student athlete organizations, Buckeye Spectrum, which is for our LGBTQIA+ identified individuals and allies, and then also Peer Educators, which is a mental health and wellness student athlete org. I'm just super thankful to be on the call this evening and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Alex. And Michelle, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So my name is Michelle Venerable, pronouns she, they. I graduated from Stanislaus State University, ran track at Stan State, was pretty involved on campus during my college career. We didn't have a Black student union organization when my first year at Stan. So me and a few teammates actually started the Black Student Union at our campus, and then just kind of sticking my foot in any other types of organizations in student government, representing not representing, but sitting as a director for diversity and athletics. So just, being definitely an advocate at the state level as well. And then now I work in the mental health field in Sacramento at a nonprofit organization, and also just staying active in the Sacramento community, or really the Central Valley and the Sacramento community, just organizing or just showing up wherever help is needed. And yeah, just being, really just being out in the community. It's always helpful. Thank you. And I'm also very honored to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle, and everybody for sharing. I appreciate you all being here. As we can hear, their resumes are long. And so really excited to hear what you all have to say in this conversation that we're going to jump into. But before we get into the conversation, I would like to define some terms that some of our viewers may not be as familiar with. And so the first term that we want to go over is heteronormativity. And this is denoting relating to a worldview that promotes heterosexuality as the normal or preferable sexual orientation. Heteronormativity can also go a little further than just sexual orientation, but also how you have to carry yourself. So seeing that women act a certain way, men act a certain way, and so on. Next, we'll talk about queer. And so queer is a term that has evolved over time. It describes the sexual or gender identities other than straight and cisgender. It also can refer to other. So if you're going to other something or it's not within the norm, some will refer to it as being queer or you're queering something. And the next term is cisgender. So cisgender denotes or relates to a person who sense of personal identity and personality is corresponding with the gender that they were assigned with or the sex that they were assigned with at birth. And so it's good to mention cisgender. That goes hand in hand with heteronormativity. And folks who do not identify as cisgender often are seen as a queer identity. And then we will end with societal norms or social norms. And so social norms are unwritten rules or beliefs, attitudes and behaviors that are considered acceptable in particular to social groups or culture. So being in college athletics, we have social norms that we are supposed to follow, but some of those norms are constricting or do not allow certain people to live their life how they would want to, and it harms them. So our conversation will flow through these words, and some of these words may come up, but it's a good thing to understand those words and think about them as we're talking today. So now that we are past all the education jargon, we will jump into the questions. So I do understand like all of you come from a different background, all of us today viewing, we all come from a different background, different places within collegiate athletics, and collectively we still interact with the cis heteronormativity that collegiate athletics is built off of. So I definitely like to understand more about what you've experienced and when cis heteronormativity was more of an institutional issue as opposed to a one-off or personal issue that you faced. And so I'll start off with Kamal and then anybody else can jump in.
Yes, okay. So there was an experience that had happened in the weight room. Women, when we're lifting, like we wear like shorts, we wear spandex, whichever it is, tank tops. At one point, we weren't allowed to wear tank tops because it was showing off too much skin. And there was, I remember there was one individual who was on my team who were wearing Spanx, and normally the women's Spanx for women's track and field are a little bit shorter when racing. And so at one point there, one of our weightlifting coach, it became a concern that women shouldn't be wearing like those tight shorts or those short shorts. And so at one point they asked the whole entire track and field team, women, to start wearing shorts. And so at one point the track and field team didn't provide women the shorts at the time. So it was like they had to go out and buy their own set of shorts. And I remember one day I stepped into the weight room and I was wearing my racing spandex. And so that's a little bit longer than the women's spandex that they have. And so it became a rule where if women couldn't wear spandex, then men couldn't wear their spandex. And so I was asked actually to put on shorts because it was unfair to the women because they couldn't wear spandex. And so it was very complicated because the women also had an issue with it because that's what they lift in, that's what they wear, that's pretty much like their uniform, essentially, what they go do into the weight room. And so it was just very weird. It was just very awkward. And so there's another time I would say essentially, especially with, as I said, I ran track and field or I still run track and field at CSU, and there's a stigma about hurdlers being gay. And so it's just kind of like weird. And so that kind of like social stigma and that social like, just kind of like, it just, like you go up to a hurdler, the assumption is that they're gay, and it's just not, that shouldn't be a thing within like society, within athletics. There's a whole bunch of different individuals who run certain events, 400, 200, long jump, high jump. And so it's just, that event has seen more of like a queer like sense, a more LGBTQ like event. And so it's weird, like it happens to be like that, but that would be like a couple of my thoughts and my examples of cis heteronormativity.
Yeah, when you mentioned the clothing part of it, you see that a lot. The heteronormativity definitely comes when it comes to what you have to wear, especially in track and field. It's not rare. So also at Davis, the same thing. You couldn't wear tank tops, and then it came to the point where you couldn't wear just your spandex to lift. And they made it a skin issue where you're touching too many surfaces, but then, you know, you see other sports and they're in there with no shirts on, and it's like, okay, is this a gender thing or is this a team thing? Like, what is going on? And so I think you definitely want to see a level playing field, but then also there needs to be real reason behind why you're limiting certain folks from being able to wear what they need to wear to compete or to train, and not just, well, I think you're going to show too much skin in the weight room. Okay, what I'm lifting, like what is that going to do to my lift? So yeah, I definitely understand.
100%. And to add on to, it's just like, it's just a sport in general. So it's like, you wouldn't see a swimmer wearing their spandex, or you wouldn't see a track runner wearing the swimmer's outfit while they run, you know? So it's just like, I feel like it just pertains to, like you said, to the sport and like the environment of that culture. And so it just really depends on if it's like a team, if it's a sport, or if it's an individual thing or a safety reason for some cases.
Right. And honestly, I thought of something. I'm not sure if we're going in this specific order, but just to speak
No,
to,
you're good. Go ahead.
to what you're talking about, just with clothing, because it made me think about high school, and not too much of college, but especially high school athletics. I never ran across country. I was a jumper. So the distance running, 800, I'm cool off that. Kylie, you got, I saw you.
Was not distance, just the 4.
No, yeah. So I would manage the team. I would manage the cross country team. And it was this really big rule, and the coaches really got on the girls on the team who would wear sports bras to run in. Like, that was a really big deal. Men, you take off your shirts, you can basically take off your pants if you wanted to at this point. Like, they feel like they got to wear, barely anything. But women, it's, our coaches really hammered on the women for taking off their shirts, because, like, what are the boys gonna say, and this and that. But also, if you think about it, just with the high school dress codes in general, it's it just kind of feeds into rape culture, and so that's what that's doing. And so that, I think that is also part of that, how it affects just institutions within like cis het normativity, of, women are supposed to be like modest and cover up a little more, where the fellas on the team, you cool, you're all right, but we don't want it. Instead of really even, like, there's not enough educating our young men about, this is staying away and shying away from rape culture ideologies, looking at women's bodies as like just objectifying, sexualizing, women's bodies. But we're telling women, like, we're punishing women at that point. So it made me think about that. But that, I didn't really see that a lot in college. It's like, y'all grown. So yeah, made me think of that. So had to put that in there.
Yeah, and I think kind of going off of both of those examples, when I thought about this question, I really kind of struggled with, the one-off examples, but then I think there's also an acknowledgement that needs to be made of the athletic kind of landscape consisting of only a binary culture. And I think that in general presents a lot of kind of barriers and issues that, student athletes are forced to navigate just due to that nature of the structure of athletics in general. And I think even within the athletic training space, that's an area that I've also seen a lot of student athletes kind of navigate some things. So just in general, that piece we're acknowledging. But I think too, more so I've seen it within the language, within, I think, coaches in the recruiting process when it comes to addressing their teams. So I've had the opportunity to work with football teams in the past, and a lot of the head coaches will kind of address their guys as, when you get married to your wife, or when you have children, or your parents' mom and dad, and that, is dismissing the current player on the team with same-sex parents already. So I think it's very, very isolating for student athletes who do identify with the other outside of the binary, to be on a team where their experience isn't even addressed or mentioned, or their future isn't even represented in the narrative that the coaches are relaying to their athletes. And then I also think that is shown up too. I spoke on the training room within kind of the treatment and interactions our student athletes have with training staff as well, because that's another medical area. And I think that's an area where you need those check the box terms or those definitions, and you must define yourself to be able to receive XYZ treatment. So I think those are two areas specifically where I've seen themes just where our student athletes have had to navigate, and even I think faculty and staff in general too.
Right.
Preach.
And man, see, you know what, like, I don't want to spend like too much time on this one question. It might like bleed into the other, but you know, you mentioned just the binary of athletics and how much that is just embedded within athletics. And that just, you know, there's really, because trans athletes definitely exist, you know what I mean? And there's really no space for trans non-binary athletes in, well, anywhere really, because it's only, you know, women's and men. And I mean, I wrote my capstone on this, so I could talk about this forever.
Knowledge.
Right. No, so I mean, so I just like, I did a lot of research on it, and it is a whole, the whole thing, like just with the different policies that has changed within the last decade, definitely shows how transphobic the athletics department just internationally is. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but I just want to like put that out there that we definitely got some work to do.
But can we also get into, I think it's like acknowledging the actual structure and system, but even acknowledging who is working in athletics, like who are the people in athletics that are creating the structure, the policies, the procedures, who's sitting at the table. Because I think if you don't have a trans or non-binary person, you're not going to have that voice or representation, or even that, you know, that thought process to consider.
Facts, white cis men. It's all what it is.
At them.
And then when you even think about when they try to diversify the athletic department or athletics, it's always about either race or gender, but never thinking deeper into gender, deeper into race, deeper into anything. I think a big thing is the lack of representation that student athletes have, and then lack of support. So when you think about cis het things, when they create these different groups, unless you have an athlete ally on your campus, there's nowhere for a trans non-binary student athlete to go. No. They can't go to the Black group, they can't go to the Hispanic group, they can't, like, they're not looking for that. They're looking for an identity that is considered an other. And so I think a big thing with athletic departments that they need to consider is, if you are committed to this D&I push that has come around in the last year, you have to think outside of just what you identify with or what you're used to seeing. And then you have to enforce the behavior that is going to support those student athletes on your coaches, on your staff, all the way through. So I think that's a big thing for me. I think about coaches, as Alex, you kind of already talked about, saying, you know, is your boyfriend ever going to come around? Or you look really pretty today, like, who are you trying to impress on the team? And then want to talk about guys on the team. And I personally addressed one of my coaches and just said, you know, when you ask, like, oh, are you guys, even if you shouldn't even be talking about this, it's a Friday, you're saying, are you going to go out with your boyfriend tonight? There's other people who like other things. You don't have to say just boyfriends. You don't have to just say girlfriends. You can say partners if you want to have that conversation, which is still kind of weird. But if that's the conversation you want to have, at least be inclusive about it. Now, that coach was receptive to it after a while and did try to be more inclusive with their language. But I think it's unfortunate that it has to come from the student athletes to get that support. It should be coming top down, because if you're bringing these students here, you want them to perform well, you promise their parents you're going to take care of them, develop them, support them. You should also understand, how do you take care of them? How do you support them? How do you help them develop? And by putting them in this box that they don't fit in, it's harming them. So
yes.
So
yeah.
If you want to go any deeper, anybody else want to chime in on that?
No, there's
question?
just so many like
so
responses I could respond to.
Right.
I think too, I want to talk about like the whole term of like student-led or student-driven, and what that can carry, because I think a lot of times the answer is, you know, when D&I conversations come up, it's, well, what do the students think? What do they want to see? What are they doing? They should lead this initiative. They should drive this kind of movement. And my question is, well, what are we doing as the professionals? Like, what barriers are we breaking down? How are we making it easier for their impact to be achieved? Because I think student-led and student-driven borders know you're doing the emotional labor and you are holding that emotional capacity. And I, as a professional, am not dealing with that. And I also think like the concept of like a palatable D&I, like what is performative or what is easy to talk about type of D&I. And I think that this space is one of those where I think, to Michaela's point, you can hire in somebody, but what boxes are you checking, and is it really that depth that you're looking for?
Facts, right. And then that just, because I mean, at that point, like, I can't even count how many ways student athletes are exploited, especially student athletes of color. And if you're going to go deeper into that, queer student athletes of color, trans student athletes of color, queer, trans, just, I mean, all the intersections that student athlete may have and how they're exploited as an athlete, academically, professionally, and the lack of support that they get outside of their practice and competition expectations is a huge issue. And that, where am I gonna go with this? But yeah, I mean, so that like, and I mean, I just think about, we are also with the D&I initiatives, and for those who don't know what we're talking about with D&I, diversity and inclusion initiatives, I know for me too, so I was in Stanislaus and Turlock, and if you know anything about Turlock, ain't nothing but white folks there. So I was definitely pushed into different spaces because I like fit that checkbox. And you know, at some point I didn't realize until a little later that I was really just a token, you know, I think in these different spaces, to where like I would even provide feedback and it really wouldn't go anywhere. It was just kind of like, well, she's there, she's Black, queer, a student athlete, and so this will look good, you know, having her sit at our table of all white folks, and you know, and then just exploited from there, like that clear exploitation. And so like when we're talking about representation, it goes, you know, beyond like just the diversity and the makeup of the group, but are we actually taking the feedback that we're providing and implementing it into practice and policy? And if we're not doing that, then this is just, you're just here looking for a pretty picture.
I just feel like, going off of what you were saying too, like being a token, there are times where it's like individuals like who bring up a certain type of concern. I feel that the university or the athletic department will take into consideration that thought, and have that have them be supportive of whatever issue is being brought up, and they will listen to you. However, it's like Alex was saying, like that is kind of like being student-led, and so that professional isn't doing anything. They're not hurting like the emotional like aspects of what is happening. And so from personal experience, I never really filled like my bucket as a sophomore. I felt like very trapped, and when I came out as a gay individual, like that's when everything just started to spark and everything was just falling in place. As like my athletics started to like get back up to par, my academics was getting better, and it was only because like I felt like complete, and I felt that my voice was being heard at my other institution and they were being supported. And so like coming into like a institution that is predominantly white, that lacked visibility, it was something that needed to like become more aware for other student athletes to come out. And so I got into like so many like friendships and so many connections with other student athletes who identified with, whether they identified with me or identify within the community or who are allies with the community. And it was just such a like heartwarming and such like a drive and push, because I know that there are other athletes who want the same thing, who want this visibility to come out, who want that representation and not just be a token of their team, or just because they're winning championship titles and they're winning championship titles for the team and not feeling that they did it for themselves. And so it's just insane to see that there's like that higher up, whoever that may be within the athletic department, is using that as a saying, yes, we are diverse and inclusive, but actually not taking those steps and not being like asking those individuals, what do we need to do? Like, what can we do to help you? Or what are other ways that we can work with you and work with the other student athletes who may be feeling this way? And we need to start like acknowledging that, like Alex said, and start using those words and start using like a different sort of language to be inclusive and be more diverse from the higher ups within athletics.
So Kamal, I feel like that's like a perfect segue to the second half of our conversation.